So back in 2017, The Last Jedi came out, and the fan base went completely bonkers. There was a bunch of people that loved it, a bunch of people absolutely hated it. It seemed to be really divisive. So now that the dust has cleared, and it's been quite a while, Nick and I are going to take this one on for the Imaginarium and just see if we can figure out exactly what is it about this movie that got people so riled up, and exactly what are the characteristics that it has that made it so divisive. So sit back and see if you agree and check it out. Hey.
Hello.
All right. So The Last Jedi is something I've been brewing for a while, and people out there might be wondering, why in the world are we going to beat this dead horse? Because I think it's very interesting, again, from the deeper angle, from the psychological, the social angle. What happened with this? It seems like the Star Wars sequel trilogy went off the rails with The Last Jedi. And my own kind of thoughts on the movie have changed a lot over the years. I initially really liked it. And then later on, especially after watching The Rise of Skywalker, which was a complete mess, and kind of undid a whole lot of the stuff that I thought was good about The Last Jedi. I came looking back again and saying, well, there's still some pieces to it that there's been these persistent complaints, and now I can kind of see where the problem was. Just kind of coming from a storytelling, imagination point of view. And then, of course, just stepping back and looking at all the crazy backlash and the completely over-the-top stuff. But I think you can boil down the biggest problem with The Last Jedi down to one thing. Okay, and I'm not going to say what that is just yet. All right, that's my lean in to get people to kind of listen to this a little bit more to see what it is. I think there's all kinds of bits and pieces here and there that you can nitpick, but I think you can boil it down to one major problem. But before I get into what I think that is, what's your take on this movie and the sequel trilogy in general?
This is hard. It's a tough one for me. Not like, I don't know. When I look at the sequel trilogy, it honestly makes me appreciate the prequel trilogy so much more. Like that's the best thing I can say about it. When I watched The Last Jedi, before any of hearing all like the kind of online voices or the external voices chirping in about all their opinions and whatnot, I just got this distinct feeling watching it. I'm just like, something's off. Like it doesn't seem right. And when I watched The Force Awakens, I was like, this was okay, right? It wasn't terrible, but I'm pretty sure it was just like a cookie cutter copy and paste of A New Hope. And then Rise of Skywalker, I was just yeah. I was like, why?
What? Yeah, why? Yeah. I loved The Force Awakens, but my expectations for it were kind of low, honestly. I was thinking, well, it's not George Lucas, right? And I don't know what they're going to do with this. I'm pretty sure after watching the previews that they're going to just lean really hard on nostalgia, which they did. But there's something about that movie that it is what it intended to be, right? It was like, let's kick off a new set of Star Wars content, and we'll start it off with a lot of nostalgia so that we can kind of move on from there, right? And that's pretty much what they did. I wasn't a huge fan of not having Luke Skywalker in there because he was my favorite character from the Legacy, universe and all that. But instead they used him as a MacGuffin, and their rationale for doing that made sense on the surface. And they said, as soon as Luke Skywalker shows up, pretty much everything that's going to happen now is about him because he's so big.
Hmm.
And what's really weird about that too is that J.J. Abrams initially didn't want to do The Force Awakens until I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Kathleen Kennedy posed to him the question like, okay, well, let's look at this, like ask the question, like, who is Luke Skywalker? And he got very intrigued by that question. And so he kind of joined in from that angle. But then he didn't answer the question. With The Force Awakens, he just used him as a MacGuffin, right? Let's go find him. And it worked okay, I guess, for that movie. I liked the new characters, at least initially. Thought they were fun. And again, this is myth making, right? So connecting it to the Imaginarium kind of stuff that we do. Why does this matter? It's because the Star Wars movies were like a new mythology. And, we talked a little bit about the importance of the first Star Wars and how that, what played out from that trilogy and all that. The prequels, again, is something that's very interesting because I was there, I saw them, and initially I heard all the backlash against it. And I was a prequel fan from the beginning. I never disliked them. I took them for what they were, and I thought they were fun, and they had their great moments. And the 10-year dialogue and all that, I'm like, well, that's just George Lucas, whatever. That didn't bother me too much. Jar Jar didn't bother me that much, because the other stuff was so cool, right? It was just so many new environments and so much. It was just playtime, right, for the imagination, and that's what really drew me into those. Plus the arc of Vader, and he had it all clearly planned out, and that worked well. But then, so this new group comes along. We got Force Awakens, and it's like, okay, so we're gonna basically just kind of rehash A New Hope. He kind of threw in some elements from Return of the Jedi in there. We got another ginormous laser ball that we'd have to blow up. I didn't really like that aspect of Return of the Jedi, honestly. I thought that was kind of lazy. And I remember hearing the rationale, and Lucas is great about retconning his rationales over the years. Well, it was always my plan for Luke and Leia to be sisters. No, it was not your plan, sir. Don't try that. We all know that that's not the case, that you made that up later, but that's fine, whatever. Yeah. That's storytelling. You make up stuff as you go, and you have to, go back and change it. That's fine. But, I guess they needed something for the bad guys to do, and it's such a great idea. Like, why not do it one more time, and essentially they did pretty much the exact same thing in Rise of Skywalker without making it a giant laser ball.
Yep.
Instead, they said, let's just say it's a huge fleet of, Death Star wielding laser spaceships, and we have to blow them all up. Okay, fine. So then we have Force Awakens. I liked it. I watched it many times in the theater, had fun with it. I liked the dialogue and the acting, and stuff was really improved over the prequels. And of course, the effects were great. And Last Jedi comes along, and initially I loved it. And I'll go through some of the stuff I think that I thought it did well. One is that it took the Empire Strikes Back structure and it twisted it. It's very similar to The Empire Strikes Back if you really look at it. You've got the good guys are on a chase, and it's a slow chase, and they're trying to weasel their way out of the bad guys finding them. Meanwhile, the Force-sensitive character runs off and gets training from a reclusive master. Then that doesn't go well. They leave the master to go do something stupid, face off against the bad guy, get a really big reveal about their past, and then break off from the engagement, reunite with the good guys, the other good guys, the normals of the party, and then, go to do other stuff. And so it's very similar. And I recognized that the first time I saw it. I'm like, oh, they're just riffing on The Empire Strikes Back. Okay, it's poetry, it rhymes, I get that. That's the usual George Lucas thing. But then Rian Johnson said, but we're going to axe Snoke. But, Luke is going to die instead of Yoda dying in the next movie, like 5 minutes into the next movie, you guys. So not a huge twist there, but different enough, I guess. and we're going to say, instead of the Vader character still trying to turn the force sensitive good guy character, we're going to say, no, he kills off the Emperor and becomes the Emperor. I thought, that's cool. Let's see where that goes. And it didn't go anywhere.
Nope.
And so I was extremely disappointed by that. But that's not The Last Jedi's fault. That's Rise of Skywalker's fault. Complaints that I heard that didn't make any sense to me at the time. The Canto Bight sequence was horrible. I didn't think it was that bad. To me, it was just typical Star Wars weirdness. The complaints about the humor, like the little porg creatures. Excuse me, I'm fighting off a cold. They didn't bother me. But then Jar Jar didn't bother me. I mean, it's a Star Wars. It's got its zany, whimsical stuff. Who cares? And I remember, actually, Empire Strikes Back, which everybody says is the best one, which I think is true. People complained about the humor in that. They said there were too many Muppets, right, with Yoda, and that the Goofy, when he's pretending to be a goofball, no, that's not serious enough, etc. So I always thought, well, there's always these Star Wars fans that want everything to be deadly, edgelordy serious, and they're just not gonna be happy. So same thing here. But like, did any of those complain? I've gotten more, but I wanted to stop and get your thoughts on this so far.
I mean, yeah, I never had an issue with the zaniness or it being whimsical. And
No.
just kind of weird. I enjoy that about Star Wars. I remember the first time watching A New Hope when they were going to the cantina, and it's like I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like this is interesting. Yeah. I think my complaints. I know when we were talking off camera last time, my complaints were a little bit different. I think in terms of the what I perceive to be Rian Johnson's underlying message to the film. And then, you mentioned something, and I think it's worth mentioning on my part, but there was this kind of cookie cutterness to it. But I think really Lucas initially took a lot from Joseph Campbell, right? And I mean, that's apparent. He's talked about it. I mean, it's not news by any means, but I think what they did with specifically in The Last Jedi is that they try to turn it on its head.
Yeah.
It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And it was I think the issue for me was a lot of it was about deconstruction instead of something that was constructive.
Yeah. And that's always the danger is with popular storytelling, if you have to stick to the conventions or else you're going to disappoint your audience. That's something that all the story gurus will tell you. Don't try to get too fancy and try to, fancy yourself as some kind of avant-garde, blah, 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 because you're just going to lose most people. But at the same time, you can't just write the same thing, right? Then it's cliche. So you have to find that sweet spot where you take the genre conventions and you twist them enough to where they seem, so there's something new and fresh to them. It's not easy to do. I guess that's why those guys get paid the big bucks, when they do it right. Because it brings in a lot of money. and that in itself is very interesting from a psychological point of view, because that's what we're really talking about is resonance. So that's what underlies all these discussions. But yeah, if you twist it too hard, then it comes across as there's a lot of ways it can go wrong. Like in one way, it can seem kind of preachy or contrived.
Yeah.
Or you'll disappoint the audience because they'll be like, well, I was expecting this and I didn't get that. And that's like the death knell, because most of the time your audience won't know that that's what the problem is. They'll just say, I don't like it. I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? And so that's just one of the challenges.
Yeah.
There's some other things about it too. Like I remember everybody was complaining about Rey having being a Mary Sue and all that sort of stuff, and I thought, again, that's another part of Star Wars where you've got one character who's stupidly overpowered, and they don't go through a whole lot of training and they get really strong. I think they pushed it a lot with this. Like I think Rey goes through the least amount of training and gets the most amount of powerful of like Anakin versus Luke versus Rey. And so, you could say, well, they're out trying to escalate the stakes with each trilogy. Yeah, okay. So I just kind of shrugged and said, well, whatever. It didn't ruin the experience for me so much. I didn't notice it, but it didn't pull me out too much. Then there was the Snoke thing. I don't know if you remember that. There was a lot of people complaining about, oh, they got rid of Snoke. What about him? Well, we don't know anything about him, and now he's dead. So what was the point? And that I did understand, that complaint. Even though the counter to that was, well, we didn't know anything about the Emperor either. But that's not quite the same thing, because the Emperor didn't just cacked in the second episode, right? That's kind of what would have happened. So then it's one of those questions of, oh, then what was the point of this guy? Which suggests that where there was an expectation, if you have a character like Snoke show up, then the expectation is there's going to be a payoff at some point that tells us what's up with that guy. Is he just the supreme manifestation of evil like Palpatine was? I'm sure there's more to his story now, of course, with all the expanded content.
Yeah.
But that's all we needed in the original trilogy. He's just the big main bad guy, and if he gets overthrown, then it's over. He's Sauron, right? Mm-hmm. And that was enough. But this time, well, okay, we got a new big bad guy. Okay, fine. We're going to say he's just like Palpatine. But the problem is, this is a Star Wars story, which means the Palpatine's in the history of Snoke. So well, now we've got to figure out how did they connect? And they never answered that. And that was frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Did you notice that, or was that just...
No, I think you're right. Well, you talk about expectations, right? And I think that and this is something that's very common in just fantasy, big media material now, and just it's in the pipeline. It's always in the conversation. It's just like, the fans are wrong, or the fans are overzealous, and this, that, and the other. And I think that can be true. But I think expectations are huge, especially with these stories. And I think the reason why people get so invested in them is, well, there could be many reasons, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we are all prone to understand struggle and understand overcoming something, and it's embedded in our nature to a certain degree. And I think the anticipation in these stories is that, yes, we all have these expectations. We can all see it and we can all feel it, and there has to be some level of emotional resonance, and that wasn't there. And Snoke is a prime example of a character that, you have these expectations, right? You've seen it in so many stories before, and you're okay with seeing it again. You're okay with seeing it again. Yeah. But the depth, the struggle, and the emotional resonance has to be there. And he was just a hard stop. Like, it's just like, what? Like, yeah, why? Yeah.
Not only was it, where the hell did this guy come from, which they don't explain in The Force Awakens, but then he disappears, and you're like, oh, wait, what was the point of that at all? It would be sort of like The Lord of the Rings, right? The sequel, where a new guy shows up who doesn't seem to have any connection with Sauron, but he's just as powerful and just as badass, and then he keels over. And you're like, what?
Like, okay.
Okay. Yeah, it would just be bizarre, right? And here it's that same sense of, you talk about the expectations. It just brought to mind the prequel trilogy, and I was around for the Phantom Menace, right? So when the Phantom Menace was about to come out, the hype for it was insane. It was absolutely bonkers. 1999. It had been 15 years since anyone saw any Star Wars movies. There was tons of books, but that's not the same thing. The trailers had been released, and after watching the trailers, I remember watching them and thinking, where is he going with this? This is bizarre, right? Like, why is he having Anakin starting at age 9? But I'm like, okay, let's see what he's got going. Nevertheless, the hype machine was cranked into overdrive. So I don't know if any movie could have lived up to that. But isn't that interesting that so many people put so much expectation on it? What were they hoping for?
Yeah.
Right? Is it a religious experience they wanted?
Yeah.
Because I think it kind of was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to go in there to be completely blown away and sent into another universe. It's like, I think it would have been easier to just give everybody a bunch of mushrooms or something. and they would have gotten what they were expecting from a mere movie,
Yeah.
And despite all that, now it at least gets a little more respect than it used to, the prequels in general. But they got better as they went in a lot of ways, and of course, the Return of the Revenge of the Sith really did it.
Yeah.
So
I think that healthy balance, like I think there has. Well, I know we've talked about this extensively in terms of like fanaticism versus being a fan and so on and so forth. But like,
yeah.
I think there's a healthy balance. And what I meant by like knowing, I think because stories are so intimately tied to us as humans, when we see the ones that are fulfilling, maybe not necessarily fulfilling internally for fanatics, right? They need it to be right because there's something missing in their own lives. They're not acting and drawing on their own potential, right? For somebody that has a healthy kind of separation with it. For me, going into it, when I saw The Last Jedi, having a healthy separation from it, I was still like, this is terrible. Like I still came out of it thinking like, man, like, what is it that it irked me? And I think the fragmented storytelling, like you said, like the Rise of Skywalker completely just negated everything that came before to a certain point. And I think it was because they didn't have a cohesive through line. There was no literal like telos to the story, right? They were just like, we're just going to cookie cut this and put this together like a Frankenstein,
Well, it's the whole J.J. Abrams mystery box thing. I'll conjure up a bunch of mysteries that I have no idea what the answer is. No, I don't think it's a good idea.
Right.
Granted, I mean, he's a successful filmmaker and I'm not, but it's something that drives people bananas about his work. And compare that to, say, Christopher Nolan, who plans out every scene with such meticulous detail that he never really has to do deleted scenes. Those scenes are deleted before they ever get shot because he's so meticulous. That guy always has a plan, right? Even if the plan is so hopelessly convoluted, like in Tenet, that it takes a PhD to figure it out, Great movie, but still, it's like, okay, he's pushing the envelope of how ridiculous this is getting. And I love that about him. It's awesome, right? It's awesome. I can't wait to see anything he comes out with.
Yeah, same here.
Right. But yeah, so there's some other good things I thought about The Last Jedi that I came away from it. Like I said, I go in and I just sort of swim in it. And when I first watch a movie or a TV show, and I soak in the imagery and the symbolism and the music and all that, I don't think too much about the plot until later. And then, like with Thor Ragnarok, I had fun with it. And then afterwards, I was annoyed. I was like, wait a minute, that was kind of, why did they do that? That was stupid. Yeah. And with this one, I went in and I actually enjoyed it for quite a while before I started to get irritated by certain things. And I liked the developments for the characters that did exist because they were kind of just ideas of characters, really. Like Finn is, okay, he's a stormtrooper who defected. That's it. That's what his defining feature is in Force Awakens. Rey is a rando with force powers out in the middle of nowhere in a desert planet that's totally not Tatooine, right? Kylo Ren is a Darth Vader wannabe, but they went with that idea rather than try to make him the new Darth Vader. They said, no, that's his defining features. He wants to be the new Darth Vader, but he isn't. Well, okay, that's a pretty cool idea. And then Poe is a smart-ass ace pilot. And that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So with The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson said, let's do something with these guys, right? Let's give them some kind of an arc. Right? Rey was the whole, who is your family stuff. Finn is, okay, are you really all in with the against the First Order? Are you going to join the Resistance, or are you just going to run away? Poe had to learn how to take it down a notch in terms of ego. Okay, that's cool. Kylo Ren, he had to figure out whether or not he was going to go all in with Snoke or turn on him, and he turns on him. Okay, cool stuff. None of that, I think, was bad, except for the fact that it all got completely erased with the Rise of Skywalker. So then now I can't go back and watch The Last Jedi and enjoy those arcs because I know they don't go anywhere. They don't go anywhere. They completely derailed into random other stuff. Rose Tico, another character I thought was interesting. Her sister dies, she's really loyal. And they just decide to put her on the shelf, and I can't help but wonder if it was because of so much backlash against that character. And I'm like, that's cowardly. I'm sorry. If you're going to have a character, then do something with that character, whatever. But that's not the one thing. The one thing is Luke Skywalker. That's the problem with The Last Jedi, I think. And that's the one thing I noticed when I first watched it was when he died, I felt like, didn't we have one more movie with him before he does this? I expected him to die in a noble heroic sacrifice, but I'm like, why did they do it in the second movie? I don't know. That doesn't make much sense to me. I thought, okay, I'll go with it. And they at least gave him a great send off with that total fake out at the end there against Kylo. But that's the end. The way the arc ends isn't the problem. The problem is the way it started for me. Because the last time we saw Luke, he basically defeated the Empire with love for his father. He refused to kill him. And so he let evil destroy itself, right? Classic. It's great stuff. And then the next time we see him, he's cut himself off from the Force, totally turned away from the fight, and doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's a grump. Okay. That's a great way to hook the audience. Like, how did that happen? But man, if you're going to set that up, you better pay it off. And that's what happened. We didn't get it. We didn't get the payoff. And the only way to do that I am aware of, not being a professional screenwriter, of course, is flashback scenes. You have to go backwards and help us understand how the hell he got from point A to point B. And we didn't get it. We got explanations. We got descriptions, verbal descriptions of it, but we didn't see very much of it. You know what I'm saying? Yep. So nobody could buy it. You just couldn't buy that. That was why Mark Hamill said this feels like Jake Skywalker to me. And he was a workman-like. He just went with it. It's like, all right, I got a job to do. I got to play Luke Skywalker. Yeah. And I'm sure he got plenty of stern talkings too from Disney about voicing his opinion on that, and so he kind of backtracked some. And we've all been there, but if you don't show us, if you just tell us, we're not going to believe it when we see it. So then where he's at mentally when Rey first meets him, it doesn't jive. It doesn't make sense. We didn't know, and again, this is paralleling Empire Strikes Back. We didn't know why Yoda was out in the middle of nowhere. That had to be explained to us later. But we had never met Yoda before. Right. So it's like, well, it's just some little green dude. He's a little frog guy who lives in the middle of a jungle somewhere. That's all we know about him. It's a swamp planet. Right. But if someone had said this was the Jedi Master of the High Council, then I better have some way of understanding how in the world he wound up at Dagobah. And in that situation, you might have been able to say, well, all the Jedi were exterminated and he somehow escaped that, and that's why he's out there. Okay, that makes sense. But Luke's situation, again, it parallels Yoda's, but it's not the same, and those differences are different enough to where it rings false. Yeah. And he's like, okay, Luke, he's in the same situation, but there was no Jedi purge that would have sent him out in the middle of nowhere.
He won.
He won. He's won. Yeah, he's won. Like what?
They won.
Yeah, the good guys won.
That's something with the sequel trilogy that I'll never get over, is the fact that they needed to repeat the past in order to do what exactly, and there was a hard stop at the end of that story, and I was okay with it. I was okay with the end of The Last Jedi. Sorry, not The Last Jedi, The Return of the Jedi. I was okay with it. And they won. They won. It was good. The Empire was destroyed, and
that's a problem that Rian Johnson inherited from J.J. Abrams, though. right? And everybody kind of glossed over that. They said, okay, First Order is really just the Empire again, and the Resistance is really just the rebellion again.
Right.
And because the politics of it, oh, let's avoid politics because everybody hated that about the prequel series, but you needed that stuff in order for any of this to make sense. Otherwise, the First Order comes out of who knows where. Oh, wait a minute, well, I thought you guys won.
Yeah.
You know, oh, okay, well, here these guys are. No explanation. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It didn't work. And Johnson had to figure out what to do with that. Not to mention the whole Luke disappeared. I have no idea what happened to him. So, and Abrams obviously didn't have any idea for why, other than, well, we need him to be a MacGuffin for the other characters to find. So Johnson had to figure out, oh, why in the hell would he do that? And he did the best he could, I think, with what he was given. But even in that situation, he trusted a little bit too much to us to just accept the explanation that he gave without really hammering it home and explaining where he would have had to have been emotionally to make that choice, to cut himself off from the Force and give up.
I don't think he fully understands the characters, or at least I got the sense that he didn't understand Luke. I don't, and again, like, I looked at it as their choices with Luke were indicative of the broader choices of the movie, which were to just completely, it's very pretentious. It's like, let's just deconstruct all these expectations and really send a message that is different, right? Mm-hmm. But different isn't always better. And, you know, coming from a character that literally won, right, beat the Empire with love, right? Love for his father, knowing that deep down there was something within his father that was still good and generative and wanted life, right? That's how he won. He didn't kill his father. And then all of a sudden he's now a character that's more than willing to off his nephew because his nephew's showing some dark side tendencies.
Yeah. And see, that's the scene I'm talking about right there.
Yeah.
That scene where we get a brief flashback, but we don't see what dark thoughts he's talking about. It's only vaguely alluded to. We see the expression on Mark Hamill's face, and he acts the hell out of that scene, doing the best he can, but he doesn't have enough material to work with. You know, whatever he saw in his head, we didn't get to see. So we're not buying that he would think of it as so bad that he would consider briefly, even for a microsecond, of killing him. We have to see that if we're going to believe it from Luke Skywalker, of all people. You know, you might be able to get away with that in some other show or movie, but not a character who's been in this collective consciousness for so long as like the paragon of good.
Yeah.
Consider this possibility, right? What if, so Luke used love and nonviolence to defeat the Empire, refusing to kill his father. What if that's the thing that sent him over the edge? What if he saw the darkness and he still refused to fight it? And that's what led to Kylo Ren destroying the temple. That might have caused him to go over the edge and say, the thing I believed in that I thought was going to always win was wrong. Okay. Now that would be interesting to explore, but we'd have to see that, number one, to believe that number one. Number two, that still wouldn't necessarily lead him to where he wound up with in the beginning of the movie. But unfortunately, that was the starting point that Johnson had to deal with. And after watching more of Rian Johnson's movies, he is more of an idea guy. And I think in-depth character analysis, maybe not his thing. He's more of a plot guy, I think. And that's why he's done so well with the Knives Out movies so far, because they're convoluted plots. And the characters are really just kind of there to be moved around to service the theme that he's working with. And that's really what he does with The Last Jedi. The theme is so, it dominates the whole movie. And that's the theme is, failure can be your only strength sometimes, right? The greatest teacher failure is. But Yoda even says the theme for us. He just lays it out there. And that theme is behind the development of every other character in there. It's a technique of storytelling. The problem is when you drive it home so much that you forget about the characters you're using. So if I'm going to say that the greatest teacher is failure, I need Luke to go through an arc where he learns that. I need every other character to learn that. Poe, Finn, Rey, all of these characters. They have to learn that failure can be their teacher. Okay, that's a great idea. in any movie except a Star Wars movie where the characters are already established. So he can do this with Knives Out characters because he creates them on the spot, except for the one guy, Benoit, and that's great. It works fantastically in those movies. But in this, he had somebody who was already there. So in order to shoehorn them into this theme, he had to twist them outside of where they really belonged, right? Their essence didn't fit necessarily. So, and this is another thing about storytelling in Hollywood. They say, try to get your characters to go through arcs. Yes, but not at the expense of the character. That's another fine line you got to walk, right?
Yeah.
So I think Luke, you would have had to have created a whole lot more of an intense reason for him to go on an arc like that than we were given, which is why I think it rang false to most people who were familiar with the character. And the defenders of the movie would say, well, you just want Luke to be a total badass who didn't have any flaws or anything like that. And that's kind of what we got with the second season of The Mandalorian. We got our Luke in the tunnel slaughtering everything that moves and being a total badass. And that was a fun scene, but really kind of superficial. At the end of it, it was like, okay, well, that was cool. We all wanted to see that in The Last Jedi, but we didn't get to see that. Or in the sequel trilogy in general. But I don't think it's quite that easy to criticize, meaning that there's a certain expectation, I think, that people were missing that they should have gotten. Don't you think we needed a scene where he showed his power?
I think I think through and through, they did him a disservice. I think they did I can't help but look at that film and say to myself, is this about the actual story of Star Wars, or is it about the director? Is it about a certain message? Is it about, really kind of differentiating for the sake of what, what is at play here? And that's what I think Luke is a prime example of that. It's just like, you really get the sense that they just wanted something different for the sake of it, or they wanted something different in order to play on it. As you were talking, I thought about the one character that really, like, now looking back on, because I haven't seen it seen this movie since it came out. The one character that I feel like is the prime example of what this movie is Commander.
Hold up.
What's her name?
Commander Hold up.
Yeah. Okay. So it's again, like, let me tell you, I'm going to just tell you and keep on telling you that this is the way things are going to be, and not explain my reasoning whatsoever. And then at the very end, I'm just going to crash into everything and save the day. Right. And I feel like that was this movie. Like, let me just throw this down your throat and tell you, not show you, and not help you understand. Right. Not like, because Poe really, I think he was in the right. I think he was absolutely in the right for questioning a superior officer who was making decisions that could potentially kill everybody on board that ship. Right. Mm-hmm. And she was like, no Captain Picard, right? Like, at all. Mm-hmm. Like, it just, I was so infuriated by her character. I'm like, why is she doing this? Like, why not just explain it to the people that could potentially help you find a solution? Yeah. I feel like that's what this movie was. This movie was, I'm just going to tell you and keep telling you, and you're going to have to trust me. But then at the very end, it's just a ship fucking crashing into a bunch of other ships. Like kaboom. Kaboom.
Yeah. Yeah. And that scene, even though it looked great, the crashing, the Holdo maneuver, right? Like, that looks great, but then it's another one of those where afterwards you're thinking, well, if that was so effective, why didn't they do it more often? I mean, that certainly was a ramming technique. That was common in seafaring battles, right? Which is what space battles or Star Wars space battles anywhere, just sea battles in space. So yeah, that was kind of like, what in the world? Now I've had superior officers and commanders and stuff to behave like that before, so that didn't really bother me, because I'm like, well, yeah, I've seen that before. Not the greatest way of leading, maybe, but and at the same time, Poe was kind of being reckless. Although that whole thing is really interesting because, and I'm not sure if Johnson did this on purpose, but Holdo failed too, because if Poe hadn't destroyed that dreadnought, they'd all have been dead meat. And that was treated as a failure, which meant that, so all of these failures loop into themselves. And I'm thinking, because Johnson is a plot guy, that was intentional, that he wanted every character to have to face that failure is the greatest teacher theme. And so he crafted the whole movie around that, which is a common way of doing this with especially character-driven kind of dramas, micro plots and things like that. But again, that works great in a one-shot where all the characters are created from scratch. And in a story where you've got these characters already moving from another one, it's a whole lot harder. It's so much harder. It's kind of like the difference between Andor and Obi-Wan TV shows. With Andor, you had no expectations because almost everybody was a new character.
Right.
Which is made it easier for them to do what they wanted to with it. Whereas with Obi-Wan, you had a defined beginning and end. It was a whole lot harder to work within those confines, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another conversation. Those shows. So yeah. Well, with The Last Jedi, I was okay with where it ended. But I had a lot of big questions, like, okay, he just seemed like he deliberately ended it in such a way that they could have done anything practically, because the resistance was almost completely toast.
Yeah.
Snoke was gone. Kylo was the new guy, supreme bad guy. They could have done pretty much anything with it, and they didn't do anything with it. They just said, never mind that, we're just going to move on.
Do you think if they decided, when you're talking about failure in terms of the story, do you think, because I think that's like really what The Empire Strikes Back was, right? It's like we are at a low point right now. We did not, get to where we wanted to be. We tried and we failed, and it really led into Return, right, of the Jedi. Do you think if they had really taken, if they had begun Rise of Skywalker in a very solemn place, like we're done type thing, and built up from there, it would have been better?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the biggest mistake, where do you start with Rise of Skywalker? I think ultimately you can boil down the biggest problem with it is Palpatine. Because as soon as you bring him back, you're just repeating the same thing over and over that we've seen done already in Return of the Jedi, which is exactly what they did. You immediately telegraph a redemption arc for Kylo Ren. You immediately negate Anakin Skywalker's sacrifice and the prophecy, and replace it with this baloney. I guess Rey was really the chosen one. Come on.
Yeah.
You just made that up at the last second. All right, the whole Force dyad thing, made up on the spot.
Yeah.
Totally not set up at all. No. And Finn, right? He was supposed to lead the great rebellion of stormtroopers that had enough. No, that didn't happen. I mean, but those were expectations going in that were just totally fizzled into nothing. Rose had nothing to do with it anymore. We don't like her, so we're just going to stick her on a planet and have her do nothing. Didn't work. The Rey is a Palpatine thing.
Yeah.
No, that was the dumbest thing. I swear. Yeah. As soon as, and again, okay, this is a problem the Last Jedi did too. So I said there was one big problem. It was Luke Skywalker. There's another one. It's not as big, but it was a problem, and that is the reveal that your parents are nobodies was just told to her verbally by Kylo Ren, and she just believes it because you know it to be true. Okay. And again, that's sort of like Vader saying, well, I'm your father. Well, he could have been lying. And that's what people said that walking out of the theater. I remember hearing them people say that. No, Vader's lying about that. But then it turned out, of course, he wasn't lying. Everybody forgets that part. It was 3 long years between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, mind you. We had a lot of time to think about this. But but that was never even entertained in this case. It was, we didn't see the bodies or anything. Like maybe he could have brought the bodies in and said, see, here they are, they're dead. and they're nobody. So that didn't really work that well, but it was, you could overlook it. What I could not overlook was Kylo, again, the same guy saying, guess what, you're a Palpatine. And she just buys into it. I'm like, really? You really expect us to believe that? Come on.
Yeah.
And then to make I think Kennedy and Abrams were saying, well, we wanted to bring Palpatine back all along. I'm like, no, you didn't. No. You had no freaking plan. Get out of here.
Yeah, they had no idea what they were doing.
No.
They had no idea.
No. Yeah. Well, we're just going to make 3 more Star Wars movies because it makes money.
Yeah.
And I guess I can expect that from them, but that doesn't mean I have to like it.
This is Disney that we're talking about it also. So yeah, it's, and it isn't Lucas. It wasn't Lucas. I think if it was Lucas, if it did stay with really Lucasfilm and that parent company and not, this kind of just cash grab, and that's the thing about the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. It was about family, and it was about really just this duel of the fates. I know we've talked about this, but if Qui-Gon had lived, relationship between children and their parents, it's a very Shakespearean drama, and we didn't get that with the sequel trilogy at all.
Right. No. It was how do republics turn into dictatorships?
Yeah.
Right? It was that piece. How does a good person turn into the Lord of all darkness? How does that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a trite or simple or easy path. It was complex and interesting, and because he was afraid of loss, and that's like very Buddhist. But that's the thing that leads you to evil, and that was really cool. And then none of that philosophy or any of that depth is in the sequel trilogy because, people can grumble and complain about George Lucas, but he had a plan at least, and I would have loved to have seen what he was wanting to do. He had I think he had treatments for sequel movies. When he sold Disney, he handed it to him. I think they were not interested in what he had cooked up.
Yeah.
Knowing him, it was probably weird and probably sounded completely off the wall, but that's Lucas.
Yeah.
Right. He's a great creator, right? Maybe he's not the greatest writer of dialogue, but so what? So what? So I'm glad at least that others have. It seems like the showrunners of Andor get the political side of it spot on, and they know how to write realistic dialogue at least. They can do that, and they did a great job with that. And there's elements of the Obi-Wan show that I thought they nailed really nicely. But there's a lot of distractions in that show because they did some weird stuff with, like, let's run how many people through with a lightsaber and they still don't die. It's like, come on, how many times are you gonna? I don't believe it the first time. I'm not gonna believe it 2 more times. Come on. It's like, come on, Vader, just thwack the head off, right? You're not coming back from that.
Right. Yeah.
No. No, I don't buy that. The one thing that kills Qui-Gon, right?
Yeah.
Well, how come he didn't just get up and shake it off like all these other characters?
Right.
So that was dumb, but Hayden Christensen scenes were cool. So anyway, that's it. So that kind of boils down what I think went wrong. And I think if you take the psychological angle here and you say, what can we learn from all of this? It's that the psyche craves these mythic stories, and they need to be coherent. They need to be aligned with each other, or else they ring false, and that triggers anger and frustration. Interestingly enough, it's like not giving a drug to an addict in a way. If we're craving it that badly, that's why people get. So that is one thing I'll say about Last Jedi. It was really bad place, the wrong place, the wrong time, because it was we're just seeing the beginning of rage click culture on YouTube and Facebook and all that. And we hadn't quite recognized. I think we're still not there yet, but we're beginning to recognize now that rage is encouraged by the algorithms of these websites. And so people are and monetized, right? You get paid a lot of money to make 4-hour-long videos like Mahler did of the Last Jedi. And let's go and nitpick every single thing and complain about it. It's the worst possible thing of all time. It's like, no, it is not the worst movie ever made. Give me a freaking break. But you've got to manufacture all this rage because that's what people are interested in, listening to for some bizarre reason. You know what I'm saying? So that's maybe part of the disproportionate backlash. That's one thing. It's one thing to make a movie that disappoint people, but I mean, it's just a movie. So can we move on with our lives now?
Well, when you outsource fulfillment in life into a fantasy material, right? It's a creative material.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't end up being fulfilling.
Then you get enraged.
Well, yeah, I think the whole thing with the online media right now is it's extremely toxic.
It's a mess.
Yeah, you have fans that are enraged, but then you also have the people that are creating the material saying that it's all the fans' fault and they're a bunch of terrible people. Like it's just it's a
whiny fanboys and incels and everything else gets tossed around. So anyway, I just as soon not waste any more neurons on this subject. So we will move on from now. So something more constructive.
Next time we'll talk about the rise of Skywalker.
No, we won't. I do not want to talk about that. I've said my piece.
Thank you for having me, sir. I'll see you next time.
All right. See you, gang.
Bye, everybody.